Gary Sugal, how are you doing?
Yeah, man, I am doing great. All things considered, I'm still doing this after what, 34, 35 years. I had the pleasure of meeting you at NAM, I guess around 2000, 2002. I was thrilled the way you played and at that booth. I'll never forget it. Alto, I believe it was, and you were just doing stuff for one of the vendors, and I was so honored, that you took in some of my pieces and you played them over the years, and
Yeah.
it's wonderful. And at that time, I made CNC pieces, and I make them still till this day. They're very difficult. It's computer numerical control machining center, and the pieces are amazing. I don't know if you could see them here, but
Yeah, yeah.
stuff like this, and it's pure copper. It's gold plated with real gold, heavy gold. And I kept it. I try to keep up the quality over the years. And they're expensive and they're expensive to do. And as the years went on, probably in the last 5 years, 4 years, a lot of new people came in, and of course, a lot of people went out. It's a very tough business. And what they did is, you saw a lot of Chinese imports, and we had to compete with that. And I came along and I did what we call a TAM series to reduce the price in half. And I made those in steel mold. These are the molds that we use. I put these aside to show you if you have an interest to see it. And
Yeah, yeah.
you know, and these are the rough pieces that come out. And they're the same exact copies as the CNC pieces. I did an alto and tenor. But because they're casting, there's a lot of fluctuation in the cooling down of the metal, and a lot of work. And, you have to pay attention to get rid of some of the blemishes. It's what we call porosity in the metal. It's a little bit different. But, then along came COVID. COVID stopped everything. I had workers here, and in the last year and a half, I told everyone I wasn't going to do any machining or steel mold casting. It stopped. I took the wife in March to Maine with a computer and a 3D printer and my saxophone, and I redid everything from the beginning that I made back in '88. I duplicated every model and added some new ones into 3D printing. And what ended up happening is, of course, I created these beautiful pieces of everything, every model I made. And, I had them and I produced them, and they played great. Folks could see Stefano playing on some of the models, the Yeti, the Retro, my Super Guns, my KW, my MB. There was a Model 1 and a Model 2. I made those, and those were in a proprietary ABS PLA plastic type of material, and they play phenomenal. And I don't know. I think you received one or two. What was your thoughts on
Yeah,
that?
no, you sent me quite a few mouthpieces, the 3D printed. So if we back up a little bit, just
Sure.
to
I went too fast.
kind of no. This is great. This is what I want. But if we back up a little bit to, when we met,
Mhm.
I think I was playing alto and tenor
Mhm.
at a Steffenhauser booth
Mhm.
at the NAMM show,
Mhm.
and so you walked around the corner, and I saw you, and I was like, okay. You came up to me and you started talking about your mouthpieces, and you were very complimentary, and that's really where the relationship started.
Mhm.
And I remember our conversation. So,
Wow.
you told me that you would make me an alto, a tenor, and a soprano,
Mhm.
and man, you sent me the tenor, um, nailed it first try. No, nothing. I'm actually all three of the mouthpieces. Actually, I think the soprano, I think we tried a couple different things, but the alto and the tenor was like perfect. The first thing that you sent me,
Mhm.
and I remember calling you about the tenor mouthpiece because I was playing on something prior to that that was very resistant, and I was used to like working hard
Mhm.
when I was playing.
Mhm.
And I remember calling you and saying, "Hey, man, is there any way that we can make this a little more like a little more resistant or something?" And
Mhm.
you were like, "Look, keep playing it for like 2 weeks, and then let's talk again."
Right.
And of course, I totally listened to you,
Mhm.
and the rest is history because, uh, yeah, your mouthpieces have been, um, especially for my tenor, have really been a revelation. It's been a totally a different a game changer.
Mhm.
Allowed me to with more ease, uh, access all kinds of, uh, you know, you know, evenness throughout the full range of the instrument, and just uh, free
Oh,
blowing.
yeah.
Like
Color.
yeah, the color. I mean, it's like to be able to sound anywhere near to the way that I sound on your mouthpiece, I have to work really hard on anything else. And so I really appreciate that. And I've seen a lot of the developments in your mouthpieces and a lot of things that you've just been talking about. And
Mhm.
then we sort of reconnected when I had you make me another. Yeah, and actually, the mouthpiece that you made me, it actually says Doctor Thunder on it. It was a CNC piece you made for me, right?
Who
Uh,
graved it on there? Yeah.
Here, let me grab it.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. You got a great memory because I, you know, it was so what 20 some odd years ago, man. It was, and those were beautiful times too. But yeah.
Yeah, it was a long time ago, but but I'm looking at it. Where does it say it? It's oh yeah, right here,
Mhm.
and my right there. It says no. It says Dr. Wallace,
Yep. Hey,
Dr. Wallace, and
respect.
and this was and this is kind of a big thing for me because it's like a memento that I have commemorating the doctorate that I recently
Mhm.
finished.
Mhm.
And so it's an important mouthpiece for that reason. But, you know, but this mouthpiece has been a revelation. It really has uh, facilitated a lot of additional sort of growth in my playing
Mhm.
over the last couple years since I've been playing on it. Um, I sort of got to the point in my playing where, um, I mean, I play up in the altissimo range and stuff, but with your mouthpiece, uh, I mean, I've added probably another octave
Oof.
of like consistent range. And yeah, it's not all the mouthpiece. I mean, there's always that thing. Well, I could play on any mouthpiece. Yeah, that's true. But the thing is that the ease of which and the
Mhm.
consistency of the range
Mhm.
is just totally different. So
Yeah.
thank you for that.
Yes. Let me just tell you a little bit about that particular piece and those pieces. So, if we go back to when I first started in 1988, I was studying with Jerry. I was at Berklee College of Music studying with Jerry Bagonzi.
Mm.
And I also had a factory that I had two partners with. And so I had time to attend Berklee full time, and they took care of the business. I attended a show for mold making for jewelry parts. And basically, computers were just coming in at that time. And I was
Mm.
looking for a type of machining center to create steel molds, basically, so that you can do casting with them. And in the conversation with one of the vendors, they said, "What's your hobby?" And I said, "I'm going to Berkeley and I'm playing saxophone, and something I always wanted to do." And of course, I've been playing since I was 13. But when I lived in the Bronx, of course, there was no place to study real jazz, in that sense that, you couldn't go to a teacher and start showing you chords and so on. That information, became readily available a number of years later. But yes, I studied with
Thank you so much for watching my video so far. If you'd like to support, there are several ways to do so below. Also, likes are free. Please comment, share, and subscribe. Now back to the video.
A chap named Bill Shiner. He taught Stan Getz, and he's taught Fred Lipsius, a dear friend of mine. We hung out for a couple of years, many years, until he became famous for writing and arranging for Blood, Sweat, and Tears. At the same time, I studied with another gentleman in New York City, and he had a studio, I believe, above Radio City or Lincoln Center. Used to go down there, and his name was Joe Allard. And Joe Allard was all about sound, okay? And Joe, he was always 1 week ahead of his students to show them new concepts of how to breathe and so on. And he would even sometimes put his fingers in your mouth and, do different contortions. But he's well known for teaching Michael Brecker and some other great players over a period of time. But then I went to Berkeley at age 45, full-time. And I was in love, of course, with the saxophone since I was 13. But, when you're 15 and 18, and we played in the Borscht Belt in Monticello, which is, was a bungalow colony cluster of hundreds of bungalows, and you always had gigs up there. And I had a band that played there. It was a great time. But the thing about it was, life goes on and you've got to make a living. And I didn't see it as, playing for small gigs on the weekend as to support a family. So that's how I got into the jewelry business. And I traveled all over the world, bringing in, gold findings and stones and gems and chain. And it was pretty big business. And I made out very well. But I still had a passion for the saxophone, and going to Berkeley, and the reason I went to Berkeley was Fred Lipsius, I found out, was teaching there that year in 1986, 87. Eddie Tomasi, good friends, and a few other people, Billy Pierce. And so I wanted to study with these people. Joe Viola, he passed away. He was very, very influential. But, when I finished that one semester and I attended that trade show and started talking about, how to, what my hobby was. And they said, we'll show you how to make a mouthpiece if you want to do that. And so I had all this money and I decided to buy a CNC machining center, which was quite expensive. It was over $200,000 before we finished with the engineers, and we brought in people from Korea, from Japan. But Jerry Berganzi was influential in helping me make the mouthpiece that we know as today, the Supergans. And the Supergans was the very first model I made. And I made the first model with Jerry, and we took the best, he had boxes of links, and we took the best attributes of his old links, and that's attributes meaning the facings. There was something consistent, for example, an 8 or an 8 star that had a certain thing to it. And we took those measurements and we converted that from metric into G code to go into the computer to CNC machine the part. The thing with Jerry was he liked no baffle because he's a trained, a John Coltrane. He loves John Coltrane, who doesn't? And he made, we made those pieces with no baffle. But at the time, in that era of those years, the sound was the West Coast, the cool jazz guys, the Tom Scott type of thing. And I figured it out that I need to make a baffle to make the mouthpiece a little bit brighter. And if you read any books on how to, play altissimo, to get a bright sound, you need a baffle. That I sat down with the engineers and we made a baffle, which we call the Model 2. And that was a bright, cutting, brilliant sound, but it was brittle and it was nasal and it was kazooish. So with Jerry, he said, why don't you try copper? So we took brass material because brass has a lot of impurities in it. It has lead, zinc, antimony, tin. So all of those impurities in brass gives you that kind of a nasal type of a sound. If you're real critical about hearing what your mouthpiece sounds like and you get into it, you'll see what I'm talking about. But copper, I was able to buy pure bar stock copper. These are square rods that were eventually machined and made into a mouthpiece. And the copper added a warmth. It took away some of that brittle, that nasal, that kazoo sound, and it gave it a warm sound. And I kind of, agreed with Jerry, but, I got a call one day from Stanley Turrentine, and he was in the studio, and he said, Gary, you were right. That copper does get, rid of some of those harsh overtones. So what I also came up with the concept, and I don't think anybody's still doing it or was copied it, is I call it mini tracks. And if you look closer at your mouthpiece, you'll find lines underneath the biplate and inside the baffle.
Oh, yep.
Okay. What that is I describe that to musicians as metal wants to breathe. It wants to resonate. It's sort of like concrete on a hot day wants to expand. If you don't put lines in that concrete, sorry about that. I don't know how to get rid of it. If you don't put lines in the concrete, it's going to crack. It's going to break. It's not going to hold up for the years. And so the same concept was metal wants to resonate, and that copper wanted to resonate, but it resonated so beautiful with warmer sound. So I kept those lines in there, and I call them mini tracks. The mini tracks are inside the baffle. That's on this Model 2. Model 1 doesn't have them. And it's under the bite plate. And if you pull out that blue bite plate, you'll see those mini tracks in there, and it allows the metal. So it gives something a little special. How special? History says it all, man, because people love it. Those were CNC machined. Those were very, very expensive to produce. They were very labor intensive. The quantities that I was able to make was not a lot of pieces during the course of a month or 2 months. In 2 months, I think maybe 30, 40 pieces at a time. And then you had tools, it's a lot of high speed tools spinning, and sometimes it moves the fixture. Sometimes it's off a little bit, and you have to look for these things. Sometimes the tools get dull. Sometimes the tools break. And sometimes it's what they call is a crash. The tool could drive right into the fixture that was holding the mouthpiece. And there are videos of my fixture online that people can look at, of that fixture that I designed. And one of the reasons the machine was so expensive, the CNC machine, was I designed with these engineers what we call a 4-axis jig, you might call it, a rotating. So it gave us the ability to turn the part inside the CNC machining center. And that fixture is also online. And I did this for so many years. I made CNC pieces. And of course, they got expensive because at that time, gold was like $200-300 an ounce. Now it's, I think, $1,900, $1,950 an ounce. And I used to plate them inside. I can tell you that when I do gold plate them, I've had people here come up from Florida. One fella, he drove up one summer, Russ Weaver, and he bought one of my first Super Guns in 1999. And he's a studio musician, and he worked for Disney, and he loved my Super Guns that he decided one afternoon to drive all the way from Florida to Rhode Island. He didn't fly or anything. And he came to here, and I looked at the piece, and I can tell you honestly, that gold did not wear off. And that was a test of time as far as the durability of the piece. So yes, they're heavy gold plating. It's not flash gold, which is costume jewelry plating. These are real, this is real gold that's put on the pieces. And they are expensive. And yeah, they're about $957 today. And that was at the prices of 2014 and 15. Okay, yeah. So long story short, I had to do something about that because we were getting flooded with Chinese mouthpieces, and a lot of new people came into the business. And, God bless them. They're all, some of these people in the United States, Jody Jazz and Theo Wani, they make great mouthpieces, and there is a difference between my product and theirs. And certainly I had to compete with that market. And I devised a way, because of my jewelry background, of making jewelry. It's the same method that your jewelry, your wedding ring, your diamond ring is used. They use a rubber mold and they cast into that the image, and then they make a wax and then they burn it off, and then they cast it and burn it off. And then you get a casting and it's polished. Well, I tried that. It didn't work on a mouthpiece because there's a lot of measurements that you must maintain. And I came up with a great idea. And what we did is what we call steel mold. I showed it a few seconds ago. This is roughly what it looks like. And the parts are injected into here, and it keeps the structure of the mouthpiece. And you end up with beautiful, beautiful castings, and a lot of handwork goes into it. But again, COVID came along. I couldn't do any of this type of work. And I basically had to reinvent myself, literally, and came up with 3D printing because that became popular. To make a long story short, in 2015, I think I was the first person to create 3D printed mouthpieces. I introduced them in 2017, did not sell anything at the NAMM show. I introduced them at the NAMM show. I didn't sell any, and people knew me for CNC machining. So I decided to stick with CNC machining until COVID came along. But I knew how to make 3D printed mouthpieces. And I was, I'm selling pieces for $800 or $900 on CNC. And I'm not going to sell a $250, 3D printed piece at the NAMM show. It just didn't make sense because people knew me for CNC. They knew me for copper, for the quality and everything that goes into a super guns. I also was very fortunate a number of years ago to meet Kurt Whalen, and I basically saw him, I think in 2001, 2003, at a show in Florida. And he invited me to his room, his dressing room. And basically, I remember he had a little baby on his lap. And on the other hand, he had his saxophone. And he says, "I'm just working on my tone." And I was really like, he wasn't playing lines. He wasn't playing anything fancy. And as I came into the room, he says, "I'm just working on my tone." And I said, "Kurt, I know you're endorsing someone else." And I said, "I just want you to know who I am and what I'm doing." And I left them a few pieces of mouthpieces of the super guns. He says, "Yeah, I'll tell people about it." And, he says, "I go to the Caribbean, I go all over the place, and I will tell people about it." So maybe 2 or 3 years later, people were calling me up and they said, "Kurt is using your mouthpiece." I said, "Really?" And I didn't really follow up on it until he called me one summer afternoon and he said, "Gary, I need a ligature for this mouthpiece. I lost it, or I don't know what happened to it." I said, "I'll tell you what, Kurt, we learn something every day sitting at the bench making mouthpieces. It's an ongoing education. You learn things about it. It happens all the time, even with 3D printing." So I said, "Let me make a model for you, and I will, make some changes." And I did. I made the mouthpiece I made it a KW1 and a KW2, one with a baffle and one without a baffle. And I made some changes to the super guns. He got the pieces. He called me up. He said, "Man," he said, "I don't know much about how you did this, but you don't need to send me anymore. I am married to this." And he used it for about 14 years, the KW model. And, he had another deal that was a business, and that's fine, because in life, nothing stays the same. And he's just been he's a great guy, and I adore him and for what he stands for and what he represents. Since that time, there's been so many players, and I keep a count because we buy the bar stock of that pure copper bar stock. It's 100% pure copper, and I buy them pre-cut because they come in 15, 14-foot lengths, and they have to be cut to 4.5 inches to fit into my fixture. I have made over 27,000 CNC mouthpieces. Every one play tested, that went out the door, that was sold, was play tested and finished by me. I don't have anybody doing that work. So that's 27,000 mouthpieces. That includes altos, tenors, and sopranos, man. And that's a lot of, considering the work that goes into them. Am I
That's
rich?
amazing.
No, I am rich in the sense that I am joyful about the people who got them and who love those pieces, and including Dave Lehman. I got to take a moment to say Dave was always beautiful, is beautiful, was beautiful, and remains beautiful because he's one of my, you know, one of the cats that I admire tremendously. And I made for him what we call a Super League just about the same time I was working with Paganzi. I've met some other great people that come to mind. You know, Mark Revere or Billy Joel. It was a story in itself. It's amazing. I met him in an elevator at a concert at Mohegan Sun in 2007, and he basically got in the elevator. My daughter was with me. We were watching the Billy Joel concert that evening. My daughter said, that's Mark Rivera. And I said, oh, okay. Mark, you sound really good. I said, and he said, yeah, thank you. What's your name? And I said, Gary Sugal. He said, oh, you're the cat up in Rhode Island that makes those mouthpieces. I said, seriously? You know who I am? You know, I was like, whoa. So long story short, he says, I'm not looking for a mouthpiece. He said, but we're doing 10 shows here at Mohegan Sun. And, you know, if you are here in 2 weeks and you want to show me a couple of pieces, bring them down. So it normally takes me 4 to 6 weeks. I hustled and bustled within that 2 weeks, and I finished up about 3 or 4 pieces. I got to his room 2 weeks later. My wife was with me, and I'll never forget. He picks up the first mouthpiece. He plays it. This is really good. He picks up the second mouthpiece. This is really nice. Third, he says, you're not leaving the room with that mouthpiece. You're not leaving here with it at all. Of course, you know, I was like, oh, wow. I said, one thing, Mark, you got to work with this mouthpiece for about 2 weeks till your embouchure adjusts. This is not something that's a narrow mouthpiece. Your embouchure has to adjust to it, and you got to get comfortable because your inner ear is so used to what you had before. It could be a Rovner, it could be, you know, a Link. So, and the way it's structured and the way it's going to feel is going to change, and it needs to settle. The metal has been under so much stress, like a house. That metal needs to settle down a little bit. So we need to play it for a week or two. Okay, we finish that and we go into the auditorium, and the band starts to play, and there he is. He's playing the mouthpiece, and I'm like, and you could recognize right away because you can see the blue and the built-on.
Right.
So I said to my wife, I said, he's using the piece, and he sounded great. The end of the story is Sunday, okay? Sunday morning, 8 o'clock, we had exchanged phones, and he called me up and he said, and I thought something happened. I see his phone number. I said, oh, maybe the ligature fell off, or maybe he needs another ligature, or something happened. And he turns around, he says, Gary, I want every effing mouthpiece that you make. And so he's gotten about 6 or 8 of them. Stories like that, you know, just, you know, it makes it a huge amount of fun and a lot of joy. My daughters see it, you know, I say, hey, that guy's using your mouthpiece. And, you know, Billy Joe, he got her tickets when she was studying in Pennsylvania. She's an eye doctor. And he sent us tickets to that. I mean, it's just really nice. So to go a little bit further, I started with these 3D printed mouthpieces. And yes, there's a lot of people making 3D mouthpieces. And yes, you can even get free what they call STL files. These are files that actually you put into the printer of a 3D printer, and you will create, you know, that image. I made a lot of those pieces, and they play great. And there's a ton of videos of Stefano Bendetti playing the early pieces that I made. And early, meaning about 6 or 8 months ago. In the last month and a half, I came across a way to, it's a proprietary filament. It's made from metal powders, okay? And I have some pictures up there, and I'll be showing a lot more. And I did them in brass and metal powder, and it looks something like this. I think I sent you one, I'm not sure.
Yes, you did.
Okay, so that
it's
was
heavier
brass.
Than the.
Yeah, it's heavier, and it feels like a metal mouthpiece. That's the nice part about it. and they play amazing.
It's great.
Yeah,
It's totally great.
did you play them? I don't.
Oh yeah. I did, and I owe you a video. I filmed the unboxing video, and then I got sidetracked with a bunch of stuff, and it was like the end of the school year and stuff. But I'm going to, I owe you a video.
No, I'm not bringing that up because I would love to have it. I'm honored with anything that you have to say about it. So then I started to go a little further, and I found copper powder, and that's what this thing looks like. And so I made the models with a bite plate and without a bite plate, and you can see that. And they play great. And now these are all my models that I made in CNC. So it's a KW, it's a Super Gans, it's a KW, and an MB. This is the MB. I don't know if you can see it, but this is an MB. And the nice part about it, I was able to make them with a bite plate and without a bite plate. Then one afternoon, I got really stupid. And I said, I want to make something that's a little fatter, a little bit bigger, other than the models that people know me for. And I decided to make what I call a fat boy. And this is the fat boy, and this is the copper material, and it's without a bite plate. And I made them, of course, in the brass powder. I made them in the copper, from the copper powder, and I made them in what we call forged steel, I call. This is a powder that's converted to filament that I basically use the same programs that I do to do the let's call them plastic mouthpieces, or the 3D printed mouthpiece. But this is 3D printed, and it's forged steel, copper, I call it copper tone. The brass, I call it Metallica. And then somebody said, why don't you put a bite plate on it? So go into the CAD program, and I made one to take a bite plate. This was just finished the last couple of days, and I'm thrilled the way it plays, man. It's so, and making these pieces, they're affordable. They play as good as any metal mouthpiece I made, or compare it to anybody else's mouthpiece. You can try that and compare it, and you will find that these pieces are just as good. Don't take my word for it. There's a video of Stefano Bendetti talking about the Metallica mouthpieces, the mouthpieces made from brass. Hey, that's my story, man, about mouthpieces. Anything comes to mind now, I'll tell you about it. But
Yeah. So
you asked questions. I mean, I'm rattling on like a machine gun, because I don't talk to anybody. I'm alone here in this facility, and all I do is mouthpieces. I'm doing everything from cleaning the toilet bowl to doing CNC to doing 3D printed to doing TAM mouthpieces. My days are pretty long. I start around 5:30, 6 o'clock, but anybody can call me and talk to me. I love talking to players. I love dealing with, musicians and helping them through their problems. And, it's that kind of thing. And I'm going to keep doing it. I have to tell you, I'm getting a little bit older, but I have to tell you, I'm going to keep doing this till I can't do it anymore. And, it's, so yeah. So go ahead. I'm sure you must have some questions. Like I said,
sure. Yeah. So, I have a bunch of your 3D printed mouthpieces, and I can attest they play great. They play as well as okay. So the mouthpiece that you made for me, the CNC mouthpiece, the most recent one. I'm partial to this mouthpiece. It's based on a KW3, but you did some tweaking to it that made it, just a little bit custom, a little bit different than the other mouthpieces. And so I'm partial to that, but all of the 3D printed mouthpieces that you sent, they all play great. You stick any reed on them, and it just plays.
Uh-huh.
And particularly partial to this, I think it was the copper. This process you were talking about.
Right.
It's a heavier, yeah, but it's like the copper one,
Uh-huh.
and it's an MB3 and 8-star.
Uh-huh.
That thing is great.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Yeah.
but everything that you've sent me, it all plays well.
Yeah.
So it's all tremendously consistent.
Yeah, and that's so important. When you do CNC machining, it's a lot of work to keep it consistent, to make it consistent. And people, there's a saying that if you don't get criticized for the work that you do, and people don't find criticism, you don't have a good product. And I've gotten some criticism, and I am aware of it, and I take responsibility for any pieces that people find that is not suitable for them, or may find a cosmetic defect. But honest to God, every single piece that I make, I play test it, I go through it. And sometimes I have a bunch of mouthpieces that I'm playing, and this is awesome, he's going to love it. And I send it, I may miss something. I'm only human because I'm working with pieces. But what I'm looking for is I'm looking for a great sound. I told you I studied with Joe Allard, and Joe Allard made for me a mouthpiece that played awesome. He made an alto mouthpiece, and he made it out of a doorknob. Believe it or not, it was made out of a doorknob. It looked like, something awful, but it played great. And I had it for a number of years. And then some people broke into my home in the Bronx. I lived on the Grand Concourse at that time with my parents, and they stole my alto and my tenor, and that mouthpiece was there with, that was stolen. But anyway, with 3D, if there's something not correct or wrong, it's easy to adjust. You adjust it in the CAD, you adjust it, and then you override your STL file, and it comes out perfect. So I want to say, if anything, the future of mouthpiece manufacturing is not going to be CNC machining, simply because it's very expensive, it's labor intensive, and production is not as big as some people want you to believe. 3D printing is, I have 9 machines, 9 3D printers here. 3 of them are still unboxed, 3 of them at home, and 3 of them here. And I run those machines every day. And I'm making mouthpieces. I wish I was selling every piece that came out, but I have them, and you'll see them in the market very, very soon. I just can say that over the next 10 or 20 years, this is where the industry is going to be 3D printed. There's going to be better material. There's going to be more designs, and hopefully more people will be doing 3D printing. Manufacturers as well as consumers. And I think, that's where it's all going, and it's to be competitive. You mentioned about the reed being reed friendly. Man, I want to tell you that the mouthpieces, when I first made them, I tested every reed that was in the market, basically Hemke, Freddy's, Rico Select, Rico Royal. And I stuck with Rico Royal for many years. And then around 2000 at the NAMM show, I met the people at Riccati. And I love those reeds. They're cane reeds. And they played on my pieces just beautiful. And those were the reeds that I recommended. If somebody called and ordered a mouthpiece, I tell them, try out Riccati Gold reeds. I did that. When I made the 3D printed mouthpiece, I made material in carbon fiber. I haven't mentioned that, but I made the mouthpieces in carbon fiber, and they played wonderful, just like your Metallica or your brass piece that you have, except that it's very light. It's very, very light. That's the first reaction. Even when I brought home the first pieces, my wife said, "This is so light," in the 3D printed pieces. But I got a call from people at Harry Hartman. They make fiber reeds, fiber synthetic reeds. I want to tell you, those reeds are awesome. And what they wanted from me is, because they make a fiber carbon reed, they wanted a fiber carbon mouthpiece to test it. So we traded. I just said, okay, I don't buy reeds. I have boxes of reeds, but I don't really go out and buy them as much as other people do. I put that on, and I will not test the mouthpiece ever again without a Harry Hartman fiber cane, fiber reed, it's called. And it looks like it has a zebra skin across it.
Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I had one, it's in the other room. So yes, those reeds, I can put them on a Thursday, play the thing all day, come back on a Monday, and that mouthpiece is as if I just put the horn down. They just respond incredible. And I want to tell you, I used to have fights with Dave Lehman about synthetic reeds. He's big. I guess it was Leger reeds at the time. I'm not sure. Maybe I'm wrong, but he was using synthetic reeds, and I was like, "You got to use cane reeds on this." And he said, "No, I have to be ready to play when I pick up that horn. It has to respond immediately. I can't sit there and unshrivel, a wet cane, a reed that dried out after being wet." So that's the story on the reeds. It's, for me, it's fiber reeds right now from Harry Hartman. I don't have any Leger. I hear they're very good. And again, yeah.
I have just, I had played, let's see, 25 years.
Mm-hmm.
I think I've been playing synthetic reeds.
Wow.
And so I was playing FiberCell,
mm-hmm.
and then they sort of upgraded their reeds to this FiberCell Premier, and they switched from the sort of medium hard, that sort of terminology to numbers.
Mm-hmm.
But those reeds are very soft for what the number is on the reed. It's not comparable to like cane strength. It wasn't until recently, and in particular with the new Leger signature American cut reeds, that I was able to switch over. I was able to switch to, let's see here, FiberCell. What am I saying? I was over to switch over. Now I'm playing a pretty soft American cut reed. Mm-hmm. On your mouthpiece, this 8-star,
mm-hmm.
I'm playing on a 1.75.
What kind of reed? Leger?
This is an American cut Leger signature.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in FiberCell Premier, I'd be playing a 3.5.
Wow.
So it's like about half. It's about half the strength. But now they say that the Legers are a little bit hard, even the signatures.
Mm-hmm.
But I have completely, everything is all Leger now. I was FiberCell for a long, long time, since I started playing synthetic until the last 5 years. I've been sort of like all the classical saxophone stuff was all Leger signature. Clarinet had switched over. Now I'm using European cut on the clarinet.
Mm-hmm.
Bass clarinet, I was playing Leger signature like this, but on bari sax, on tenor saxophone, and on alto, I still was having to, for like all the commercial stuff, mm-hmm. I was still having to do the FiberCell Premier, mm-hmm. until they came out with this new reed, the American cut reed, and then I was able to just make the transfer. It's a better, more consistent reed that doesn't cause you to sort of have to sacrifice extreme altissimo range. So the Leger, it has more tip strength, and it stands up to torture better.
So yeah, in all fairness, I haven't had any Legers. I should reach out to them and get a few, or try.
That's what I've been playing on your. That's what I've been playing on your mouthpiece.
So
and it's
it'd be interesting to see what the difference is, if there really is a difference. But the point is that these 3D printed mouthpieces and metal mouthpieces,
Yeah.
they've adapted, and the industry, the makers, the manufacturers, the reed makers have come up with these synthetic reeds that are wonderful
Yeah.
compared to some of the cane. And you know, if you grew up loving cane, you know, it's going to be hard to switch over, but eventually, you know, you need to try. And that's the thing about this industry. You never shut the door when somebody has something new to offer. There are players out there right now who swear by a particular brand and they will not try for, you know, for a lot of reasons, loyalty and all that, but they need to keep an open mind. And that's the way it is with me. You know, salesman shows up at my door previously, I would listen to what he had to say and what he was offering, because you never know. That's how I came across this material, this powdered material that I'm converting to metal mouthpieces, 3D printed metal mouthpieces, was this powder. And it's, you know, if I didn't have an open mind or keep an open door, I would not be there with these 3D pieces. And by the way, you mentioned Barry. I just completed a baritone in the Metallica.
Oh man!
Yeah,
Don't tell me that.
yes,
Don't tell me that.
I'm looking for it right now. But and I'm just finishing in the Steel Forge a clarinet mouthpiece.
Okay. Yeah.
Steel Forge, and it'll be brass and it'll be copper. Don't know how they play, but I just finished that. So yeah, man, I'm at it. Crazy.
Yeah. The baritone, you know, because you know I've messaged you a few times about the Barry mouthpiece.
Hold your breath. Here they are.
No.
These are two that just came off the printer. You can see even the ridge here. This stuff here. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
But this is it.
And let me ask you something about this. Okay, so when you get them off of the printer, it seems like you're going to have to do some sort of finishing work, right?
Yeah,
so tell me what that is.
Yeah, man. Let me tell you. These are the steel pieces, by the way, in baritone. I've made them. Somebody asked me in Italy, did I make baritone? And I said, yeah, I make a model. But what I did is I improved the model. I put what we call on these pieces a feather. It's on the side of the mouthpiece. You can't really see it. It's like a little feather. And then there's 3 step ridges in the mouthpiece, little lines. I don't know if you can see it. You see those?
Yeah. I can see it. Yeah.
Yeah. And so those, I call them step enhancers. So it makes the air bounce a little bit.
I see.
And Stefano got a few on the tenor, and yes, he loves it. As far as work goes, yes, there is as much work as finishing a 3D printed mouthpiece as there is doing a metal mouthpieces. And I can tell you why, because these pieces need to be, we use 5 different grits of sandpaper, 5 different grits. And, you know, so you do the first surface, it's, you know, it's a kind of wet kind of a thing, but I have another type of material that I use. It's the same material that you use, for example, in that they put on the pizza trays that go in the oven. So it seals that. But I use that as a wet with the grit. And we start out with an 80, 120, 240, 600, 800, 1200. The entire piece gets sanded down, and it's a little bit more work, but when it's finished, it's beautiful. Then inside, because it's refined powders of metal powders that are converted to a filament, there are little strings that you have to clean up, okay? In the past, I've overlooked it on occasion, and I do regret that, but I'm aware of it, and I get inside and I clean that up. The table has to be, you know, there's the old school where you pull it along, the mouthpiece along paper. So that's what you have to do to get that facing, because these facings are critical. You can have a great looking mouthpiece and it could do, you could think that it's going to play and it doesn't. But if you have a crappy mouthpiece and you have a good facing on it and you know what the measurements are, and going back to what Jerry said, one day when he left, we figured out all the measurements that were perfect for that, let's say 8 or 8 star. And he said, don't ever change anything. And I never changed the facing, the table of the mouthpiece, in whether it be CNC, TAM, which is the cast piece, and in the 3D printing. So the tables were always really wonderful, perfect. And so no matter what mouthpiece I ever made, whatever model in the future that I make, I'm going to keep that table.
Yeah.
And yes, it has to be sanded down. People are afraid to touch the table. Well, I've got a way to work with that and around it. And it's just a technique, you know, of doing something first versus doing something second, where you retain the exact measurements that that original piece has. And yes, it does get swiped, and then it gets all these different processes of getting sanded down. The thing about 3D printed mouthpieces, there's other companies out there that just take them off the printer and they send them off, hoping that they play really well. And you got players who think they're really great. They probably could be a little bit better than what they are if the folks that sent those out, you know, had some knowledge of how to sand it and how to buff up the pieces.
Yeah.
The trick that how did I learn to do this type of sanding? There's companies that make beautiful, beautiful pens, and the pen technique of doing it on a lathe, of buffing and polishing, is the same technique that I use to buff these mouthpieces, to get them to a halfway decent looking, you know, sheen on the sides and the bite plate and everything. And I do. It's a lot of work. I mean, you know, at the end of the day, I can tell you my wrists are tired and so on. But so go ahead.
Okay, so
questions.
I did want to ask you one more question.
Sure.
About the Fat Boy.
Mm.
So the diameter of the mouthpiece, how girthy it is. What is it about? Like, I mean, if so, on a tenor piece, is it going to be comparable to like a, I don't know, like a hard rubber mouthpiece? Is it in that sort of size range?
Everything about this mouthpiece, if we take, oh gosh. So if we take an MB 3D printed mouthpiece, or any of this similar to what you have, or any of the metal mouthpieces, it's going to be approximately the same.
Okay.
I don't know if you see that. So the length is the same. Does it fit onto the neck? Perfectly. Okay. And if it doesn't, if it's a little tight, it's, you know, it doesn't happen. It happened early on with another model. I think it was a soprano that I made. I can go inside and just clean it out with a little Foreman hand drill. I have a special tool that goes in and just sands out a little bit to make it a little bit bigger inside, or I can adjust it in the CAD. That's the other part. So far, no issues. They just play really great. I will send you a piece, by the way, of the Fat Boy. I'm doing them with a bite plate on it because somebody asked for it, so I can spare, you know, a brass piece, copper piece, I think.
Yeah, that'd be great.
And you can see for yourself how they play. I found that also the Steel Forge Fat Boy is probably one of the best mouthpieces I've ever made, sound-wise. It responds incredible. I don't know why it's, you know, some people say it's not the material. I have a big argument about that. It is the material. If you use pure copper on your CNC, you're going to get a better sounding mouthpiece than you do in a brass. And if you use, you know, if you do the handwork, you're going to get all the colors, all the elements that you want, that your inner ear kind of hears when you have a well-finished mouthpiece. And the material makes a difference, you know.
I want to go in on that a little bit.
Sure.
This is interesting because what you're saying, I've seen a lot of okay, I've seen certain just principles of physics and the way that metal works in uh, that on one sense seem to disprove what it is that you're saying, but when I actually play your mouthpieces, uh, what it is that you're saying seems to be totally true, and that is that the material matters, what it is that the mouthpiece is actually made out of.
Mhm.
It's not just this sort of cut inside of the mouthpiece, but rather what kind of material you're using is also a factor. I mean, you've mentioned this several times now, copper, and how copper is different than other materials. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Mhm.
And then the other thing is, um, how do you think that relates to the actual saxophone?
Mhm.
So do you think that different materials on the saxophone, let's talk about metal materials,
Okay.
because I think you can make the you could probably, if you have a plastic saxophone versus a metal saxophone,
Mhm.
I think we can agree that those are going to sound differently.
Mhm.
But if
So
you have,
imagine,
yeah,
yeah.
go ahead.
So imagine you go to the hill and there's this big gong that you want to hit with a bell, and it's made of brass and it rings through the valley. That brass is going to resonate. If it was
Yeah,
made of hard rubber, what's going to happen? It's going to get a little bit dull.
yeah,
Now, now, if you have metal, you have brass that has a lot of impurity that does give you that ring, versus you have copper that does give you a ring but doesn't have impurities in it. That's going to affect the
ah,
sound. So having pure, what we call virgin grain copper versus virgin grain brass, is it going to make a difference? It's going to make a huge difference. And I beg to differ with any of the people that's saying, it's the material. Yeah, plastic is going to sound like plastic. ABS is
yeah,
plastic, PLA is plastic. Okay, and it's going to give you, and this goes to the how good you are. It's sort of like, some people can transcribe and some people can't transcribe music. It's how good your ear is to hear what's going on with your particular sound. Do you really hear the difference? And I do. And when people ask me, how do I sound? I have to be polite. I have to be diplomatic. I can't tell them, it's terrible or this. I diplomatically say, you needed to bring it up maybe to another level and try this read, try the embouchure, try. So the other part are the physics. Yes, it's the physics of the embouchure. It's how you hold, and how you play. I mean, some people have on the horn, the fingers are, far apart from the keys. You got to keep them close. You got to keep them round, sort of. This is how I was taught, and, bent in as close as possible. But the mouthpiece by itself is going to make a difference. And then everything else is up to you. How solid is your embouchure? How much mouthpiece you're
yeah,
taking in? What is,
yeah,
and then it's the structure of that mouthpiece. Okay.
yeah,
Experienced people, make mouthpieces because they understand, different heights of the baffle if it's too high, and they make changes in it. But yes, the material is going to be a huge factor in how you sound it, and that's all I can go by. I know if okay, so I make a mouthpiece in 3D printed, and it's rubber, hard rubber, believe it or not, has no sulfur in it. It's the same concept as the metallic material, but it's particles of tiny pieces of rubber that were converted to a filament, and it's super lightweight. Compare it to a Metallica, a brass mouthpiece. There's a huge difference in the sound. It's
hmm,
darker, is what I want to say. And of
that's
course,
interesting.
yeah, and and I'm a. If you know me from the beginning of time, I was always big on what you put in your mouth is to be safe and food safe. And I have to tell you, that's a big thing. And you know, if you have a hard rubber mouthpiece and you're seeing that yellow tiny tinge to it, there's sulfur in there, and you don't want that sulfur eventually, just touching your lips and so on. It's like that. Um,
So okay, so yeah,
that
so
answer
what
your
you're saying
question?
makes Yeah, what you're saying makes sense.
Mhm.
The one of the things that made a lot of sense to me was when you said that the brass has a lot of impurities and imperfections in it, but the copper is pure.
Right.
So, really, what you're talking about is the difference between a solid piece of metal and a piece of metal that's not solid because of the imperfections.
Right.
Right.
Yep.
So
You
that
need.
makes total sense. That makes total sense that the solid piece of metal is going to sound different than the piece of metal that's not solid. And then, therefore, I think by extension, you could say plastic or hard rubber or whatever else it is, because it's lighter, and then therefore it's like maybe the molecules aren't as close together or something, you know. So then, therefore, it's not going to have the same sort of resonance
Mhm.
as something that is heavier and pure.
So, for example, I've
Hmm.
made mouthpieces of solid silver out of solid silver. Solid silver is dense. It's very, very dense. There are other metals in it, but the sound is not going to sound like a brass mouthpiece that has these impurities in it. And again, just imagine, this gong on top of the mountain. You're ringing it with a big hammer through the valley, and that beautiful brass gong goes through. Imagine if it was made of copper, or it was made of hard rubber, or it was made of plastic. Just try to imagine the overtones, the rings that you're getting from it. That's what I'm
Okay.
driving at. The depth of the resonance, the tonality, the sonic effect of what that is, like a
Okay.
boom. Yeah,
That's interesting, and I hadn't thought about that, but that makes more sense,
I hope.
because it was like a puzzle.
Really.
It's a bit of a puzzle. It was a bit of a puzzle to me because I was like, okay, I've always been taught that it's not the material, it's the shape of the cut, you know? And so, how is it possible that Gary is able to accomplish this in particular with the baffle?
Hmm.
Every other baffled mouthpiece that I play on, it's bright. I mean, it's brighter than I want it to be.
Right.
It's brittle, you know, and it robs all of the frequency out of the bottom of the horn. But for some reason, the baffle that's in your mouthpiece, it's like magic. You get all of the benefits, but none of the sort of uh, side effects, or none of the negative stuff.
Yeah.
And it's got to be the material. I
It's the
can't think of
material,
anything
and
else.
it's also the player. I mean, if you see, Sir Valor Sax, Adrian Spencer, I mean, he's a great player and he sounds great on every mouthpiece. But if you really go into his sound and you look closely, you're going to see differences in the different mouthpieces that he plays. So it's the material, it's the player. But in my case, I honestly feel, these attributes that I put into the mouthpiece, the mini tracks at the baffle. Now here's another thing that I didn't mention. In 2008, it was 2007, Huge Groove reached out to me and got a mouthpiece. He was touring with Tina Turner, and he asked me to put what we call a bullet chamber in the bottom of the bullet. It's a little circle at the bottom of the baffle. So the machine raised baffle goes in, and then you have this little curve at the bottom to let the kind of like a reservoir for air to flow. So now you're playing really hard. You got this raised baffle. You don't want the air to bounce back at you. You got the mouthpiece resonating with the mini tracks, and you need that reservoir at the bottom of the mouthpiece. And that's what I did with his pieces. He got them in a sterling silver finish, not solid silver sterling. And he bought quite a few of them for me. And he always wanted that because it had that something extra that he heard, that he listened to his own sound, and he couldn't find even to the best mouthpieces that he had previously. What I'm saying is these things that you add to pure material only enhance it. Okay. And it's through experience, through all these years of me making mouthpieces, that I feel like where everybody else should be. And, I don't see it. I just see a lot of mouthpieces being poured into the mass market and, the mass produced. And, I can tell you that, yeah, I can mass produce mouthpieces. I know 7 ways of making mouthpieces, injected molding, resin casting, lost wax casting, steel mold, CNC, 3D printed, and probably a few others. I've tried resin casting, non-consistent. I have a whole room set up for resin casting. There are people in Europe that do resin casting, and it's okay, but it's not consistent. You end up with a lot of holes, a lot of little things. The point I'm trying to make is the design of the mouthpiece, the interior is so important, and also the material. The material is critical. And, I think that I've come close to duplicating. I think that Stefano swears by the 3D printed metals to be as good, if not better, than a CNC machine piece. And that's where I am right now with it, Yeah. I'm waving my flag about it. I'm, taunting, but man, I just say, check out some of, his playing, your playing. I hope to God you do some playing and you say, yeah, and I will send you some pieces. I have a list of things I have to do every day, and I'm going to put you at the top of that list.
Well, thank you. Yeah. Gary, and of course we could keep talking. We kind of just scratched the surface.
Yeah.
But it was great talking to you again after having not seen you for so many years.
Gosh, yeah.
But again, thank you for the great work that you're doing. Thank you for my mouthpieces. And God bless you. God bless your family. And I pray that, things fully return to, even better than before the pandemic for you.
Yeah, and for players too, because, a lot of musicians, really suffered the last year and a half. We're fortunate. We always made a living, and the industry has been good to me and to my family. But, I know players, I've seen them play in front of their houses with, their saxophone case out there, just trying to get some money to, cover some of the expenses when this thing hit. For me, the pandemic was basically, reinventing what I've been doing, and another avenue to bring some joy to people's lives who love my work. And that's what is important. I mean, I don't expect everybody to support it, but it's what I do. It's what I will continue to do. It's what I love to do. I mean, I wake up in the morning, I don't care if I sell a piece or I don't, but if I make a great playing piece, I feel really good about it, because it's going to go to someone, and someone's going to I'm going to put a smile on somebody's face. And that's what's important to me. It's not about money anymore.
Yeah. Well, thank you for what you're doing.
Yeah, man.
And we'll be in touch. Like I said, I owe you a video, and I'm definitely going to get that to you. And I do.
I want to hear you play. That's my thing, man. I love your playing, and I think gosh, do more. And again, congratulations on that doctorate, man. That's a milestone. You are one of the most gifted musicians I've ever met, and I met some really great players and great musicians. But you're so gifted. And, keep sharing it, because what you do, every time I see you, you pick up a guitar, you pick up a flute, you pick up a bass player. And I'm like, Jesus, when did he learn this? What life did he come out of to learn this? This is not, and important to share it, man. Share the knowledge, which is so important, because the people coming, in down the line in the future, these are the guys that need information. They need education. And, you've got a lot to offer, and I pray that you stay healthy and you do that.
Thank you, man. I'll pay you later. All right. Well,
hopefully we get to see you someday too, man. This Zoom is good. I'm not that familiar with it. But I think it's, I think this is great what you're doing, talking to different people, letting people see what other people are like. It's, insight to some of the great players that you've interviewed over the last couple of years. And, thank you for that. Okay, man, I can keep going and going, but that ever-ready battery is starting to get a little tired too. I got to get back.
All right, man.
Yeah, man. You
All right,
stay.
I'll see you.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.